It's Sunday, May 7, 2023. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to The Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. You can support my work and get exclusive access to bonus content at patreon.com/5minute news. Joining us today is Dr. Jennifer Mercieca, a professor at the Department of Communication and Journalism at Texas A&M University and author of the award-winning book Demagogue for President, The Rhetorical Genius of Donald Trump. Jennifer, welcome back to The Weekend Show.
It's my pleasure. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. We last spoke around 5 months ago, I think it was, and quite a lot has happened since then. And so we're going to try and tackle some of the issues that people are facing this week. We're going to look at the debt ceiling in just a little while, because that's obviously something that is, the U.S. economy is on the cusp of crashing. So we're going to take a look at that. I also want to look at Donald Trump's potential appearance on CNN with in an interview with Caitlin Collins, which is an interesting decision. But first, I want to talk about everybody's favorite news anchor, Tucker Carlson. Just over a week ago that Fox News agreed to pay out $787 million in this legal settlement and fired its most popular host. And with the 2024 election essentially underway already, the right-wing Fox News now has to wrestle with how to hold on to its audience that Tucker Carlson had. He was the most popular, I'll say host, but I don't know what he is, most popular liar on the channel. I mean, we laugh, but it's not a funny situation, is it? In fact, it is probably the most dangerous thing that has happened to the U.S. Some say that Tucker Carlson has actually been more of a poison on United States culture than Donald Trump himself. Let's just talk first about the Tucker Carlson effect. I mean, how serious and how bad is this?
Well, it depends on who you are. So for the right-wing media ecosystem, losing Tucker Carlson is a big problem. Republicans trusted Tucker more than they trusted Fox News in general or any other source of news or information. And so if you're counting on having Tucker's voice to be able to convey the information that you want to your audience, you're pretty bummed out about the fact that Tucker is on. I think for the rest of us, it's maybe a different story.
Because people were addicted to him in a way. I mean, it's almost as if they maybe know that it's sensationalist, but it's delicious. It's like it's a deadly sin that they could not let go of.
That's right. Tucker Carlson has produced a show that takes all of our worst traits and spins them into a news formula. So he is able to take advantage of in-group, out-group affiliation, us versus them. He tells us routinely, he tells his audience that only he has the secret information and you can't trust anyone but him. So very much piquing people's curiosity through conspiracy. He did a service for white nationalists and, people like Alex Jones on InfoWars, which was to mainstream, normalize, use a process called narrative laundering, their talking points so that, people were constantly getting this new information that they had never heard before. No one had ever told them before, delivered from a guy who used every trick in the book to keep them on the edge of their seats, to, create the fight, flight, and flee response in them, freeze response, so that, their adrenaline is pumping, they have cortisol going through their brain. And, they feel that addiction. They feel that like, oh, no one's telling me this. I feel so good and bad at the same time whenever I watch Tucker Carlson, and nobody else can do that for me. And so, I think the audience is feeling that lack right now.
It's interesting that certainly from where I'm from, if you are a liar and you're peddling garbage material and all that kind of stuff, you'd normally not be a very good host. You would lack the skills to present that. But in America, presentation skills are from where I come from, like a very natural part of the American culture and psyche. You know, audiences are very professional audiences. They can holler and cheer and whoop in all the right places and laugh in the right places. And in the same way, hosts, no matter how awful the material they're peddling, they manage to do it in a way that is succinct and professional and polished and with panache. And isn't this part of the problem, is that it's done in such a legitimate way that in itself is part of how people become brainwashed?
Oh, absolutely. It's been a long time since we got the book, The Society of the Spectacle from Guy Debord. It's been a long time since we learned about the image event and the way that media can create reality and package it for us. This is generations now of Americans who have learned how to expect reality to be presented to them in a very specific way, and who have learned that, reality is constructed through these image events. One of the things that I was really fascinated by during Donald Trump's presidency was that, for some reason that I haven't figured out yet, the White House photographers and press corps always wanted to show Donald Trump in spectacle res, right? Like they wanted to show him from outside of the image event so that he would be in the center, surrounded by cameras and microphones. Any other president in the modern era would be shown from inside that scrum, right? From inside the image event, so that it just appeared as though the president were naturally speaking, and you wouldn't get to see the whole apparatus of the media in between. And one of the things that I noticed repeatedly with Trump is that they would always show him with all of the microphones and the boom mics and the cameras and everybody. And you used to would think that would be a bad shot, but for somehow for Trump, it was the way to show him. And I always saw him as, a demagogue of the spectacle. But, they really amplified that. He's this celebrity politician guy. And I think that goes back to your point that we sort of expect that.
They always talk about that kind of golden escalator, don't they? When he kind of came down to assume the role of the presidency. And I mean, it was just an escalator. It was just an escalator. It wasn't anything special about it. It wasn't like, I don't know, it wasn't like a Roald Dahl moment where the elevator broke through the glass ceiling and started flying around the city. I mean, he was just coming down an escalator. But that is a perfect kind of example of how he has taken, gold and the myth of this Trump Tower foyer and turned it into some kind of magical space and a moment in American history when it was just someone coming down an escalator like you might do in the mall any regular day. Yeah.
Have you ever been in Trump Tower?
I have not. I mean, I've seen it from the outside. I've walked by it, but I haven't had the confidence to go indoors.
So I hadn't either. And I wrote, actually the opening scene of my book is him coming down this escalator. And so, I did what everyone probably does. I read lots of descriptions of Trump Tower, of this foyer, of the escalator. I looked at lots of pictures and I wrote up this whole, thing. And then I went to Trump Tower and it's tiny. It's this small little disappointing space. It was empty. There were no businesses there. The only people there was the guy who was selling tchotchkes and Trump, branded items. And I thought, man, he got me again. Right?
But this is the confidence trick that Tucker Carlson employs as well. And it's this kind of faux outrage. And it's a bit like, creating the myth of something going on at the southern border that is far greater than it really is. And, the constant repetition of the southern border, why hasn't Biden gone there? Why hasn't Kamala Harris gone there? It's like, it's very much like the Wizard of Oz, right? The pulling back of the curtain, and you actually see that it's not about the southern border at all. It's about who is making it seem like the crisis is far greater than it is. I don't want to kind of devalue the immigration issue, because of course every country has problems with its border, but they are using it for electioneering purposes, and therefore they are weaponizing the language of the southern border.
Absolutely. One of the things that I try to explain to my students is the importance of media framing, and the way that you can talk about a story like the border. And, of course, we know about the agenda setting function of the media. It tells us what stories are important. But the way that framing works within or with agenda setting is really important. So if you hear that story repeatedly and you hear about an invasion at the border, right? Versus if you hear that story and you hear that it's a humanitarian crisis, those different frames compete for how we understand reality. And if you pay attention to, Fox News, Tucker Carlson, it's always going to be an invasion. And there's no policy debate that can occur between those two frames. Because if it's already an invasion, right, that implies very specific policy consequences, right? That means we need an army. That means, it's about national security, right?
And using biblical words like swarm.
Yeah.
Those types of things really cause a reaction in people, don't they?
Yeah. And if you think about it, it's very obvious what is happening. But most people, of course, don't think about it, right? They hear the news and they receive the information. The frames are implanted. They become sticky. And you never question them because you don't have that meta, communication perspective that someone like me would have, because I'm obsessed with that kind of thing. And so it's very insidious how an entire policy can be implanted in your brain without you even realizing it, just based on how an issue is framed.
With this Dominion voting systems case, which was settled out of court, as we heard, with the $787 million payout, a lot of people in the industry were thinking, how does Fox even have that much money, But apparently they do. A lot of text messages and video evidence now is starting to come out. It's being released by Media Matters and ProPublica. Various organizations are kind of releasing some of this stuff. And it's really exposed Tucker Carlson as the racist and the white nationalist and the misogynist off-screen as well as on-screen, because that was the bit that I struggled with. I was like, well, is this an act? Like, is he putting this on because it's all about ratings and box office? And because, he's admitted now, we've seen in text messages, that he thought that Sidney Powell is a moron, an idiot, the one of Trump's lawyers. She is quite something. I could write a book about just watching Sidney Powell do a press conference talking about Hugo Chavez, and she's fascinating. But it's clear that he and Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, these text messages that have gone on, prove that these people knew exactly that everything was a hoax, a scam, that there was no election interference, that everything was legitimate, and they were just trying to swing the election in Donald Trump's favor by talking about the irregularities. What does that now tell us about the man Tucker Carlson in terms of his true self and the difference between that person on screen and off screen?
It's hard to say. One of the things that I'm kind of fascinated by is the fact that these bits and pieces are being released. It seems very much like it is an attempt to silence Tucker, to, gain compliance over him, but also maybe to show his audience, sort of like you said, behind the curtain, and show who he really is. But I'm not sure what's going on with that. And I don't think anybody knows yet. But it's sort of a fascinating thing to watch unfold. Like you, I have also wondered, is that really who Tucker is or not? And it was the same thing that I wondered about Alex Jones. It was the same thing I wondered about Donald Trump, right? You sort of look at these people and you can see how they perform for the spectacle, and you wonder, like, is that real or not?
Because Alex Jones, in his divorce testimony,
Yeah.
he basically his defense was that it's an act, and he puts it on, and it's not really him. And I mean, he lost very much in that case as well. But this is the problem. It's more like you have to be a kind of evil far-right operative, like deep in your soul. And then when you go on TV, you just turn it up a bit. You increase the volume. Or in the case of Tucker Carlson, you turn it up to 11.
Yeah, so the thing with all three of them is that it almost doesn't matter if they are authentically, fascist or whatever, authoritarians, because the effect is the same on the audience, right? The effect on democracy is the same. The effect on political decision making and whether we're able to solve political problems is the same. So it doesn't matter if they earnestly are these people or they're playing a character. And really, it took me a long time to figure that out about Trump. But it's the same for all three of them. And then the other thing is that after you play a role for a while, you do become that. And I think
especially if it's successful for you, if it's making you money, and if it's a positive thing, then you maybe grow into that role more.
Sure. I mean, the same way that framing works on audiences, it works on the person who is using those frames, deploying those frames. And, if you're getting a lot of positive reinforcement for playing that character, that's activating the dopamine receptors in your brain. That's, it's changing your brain. When Hannah Arendt talked about the banality of evil, I think that this is kind of what she meant, is that the more you play a role, even if it's just a bureaucratic role of following directions, the more you become that thing, right? You become...
We all do it, though, don't we? Like, if we go for a job interview, we try and morph into the person that they want us to be to try and get the job. Right. So this is more of like a bigger version of that.
It can be, yeah. And so a lot of us spend our time trying to be good people, people who are in the media, who have a lot of political power. They often think of themselves as advocates for democracy. But what happens if you're someone who thinks you want to be an advocate for fascism? If you're rewarded for that behavior, then that's who you're going to be.
And Tucker Carlson was exposed with another message that he sent just a few days ago, where he referred to "that's not how white men fight." And this has been quite a controversial thing, because yet again it kind of supports his argument for the great replacement theory, which is something he's talked about a lot on his show, where white people, he claims, are being replaced by people of color, which is not based in truth. It's just, again, trying to kind of push fear. Let's just talk about the audience for a second, because I really feel like the effect of people like Tucker Carlson being allowed to have a cable news show, let alone one that has a huge audience, is that it's making the population angry. It's making people scared and in fear. It's putting the fear of God into people, because they think that these things are happening even though there's no evidence in the real world of them happening. So what has happened to American society? We know 70 million odd people voted for Trump, and Tucker Carlson is his bile is a very good reason that they have. Was that a vote out of fear?
Certainly, some of that is a vote out of fear and attributed, in part to what Tucker was doing. So cultivation theory is the one that we use in media studies that tells us that our reality is constructed for us by the media we consume. And the classic example of that is actually crime statistics. Most people watch local news if they watch the news. And when they watch their local news, they see a lot of local crime. And they think that crime is going up, but statistics show that actually crime has not gone up. And so, the disconnect between what they see and what they believe, is important. And it's hard to undo that, right? So you can see the statistics and say, oh, well, okay, rationally, but that doesn't change the way you feel. That doesn't change the fear. And so, we've seen just a whole slew of really unfortunate gun violence, shootings, deaths recently. that are just, a kid rang the wrong doorbell or the cheerleader got in the wrong car or whatever. This is a nation that collectively has PTSD. If you think about the years of having Trump in office, and then you think about, on top of that, having COVID, as everyone did around the world, we're stressed out. And, a responsible communicator, whether it's a presidential candidate or whether it is someone in the media, would do their best to allay those fears, right? Would try to make us more trusting of one another, would try to make us less frustrated, would try to make us less polarized. Tucker Carlson has spent the last 4 years as the center spoke, doing the opposite, trying to make us more paranoid, more frustrated, more polarized, for his own benefit.
There was another example of this that happened on Monday, and there's been protests in New York about it. And this is after a young man was effectively put into a chokehold by a former Marine. This is a young black man, Jordan Neely. He's 30 years of age. And he's a Michael Jackson impersonator, and he used to perform on the subway. He is homeless, he's poor, he's mentally ill, and unfortunately all of those things, he was being a nuisance on the train, but he didn't deserve to die. He was effectively executed in not a dissimilar way to George Floyd by a white man taking hold of a black man by the neck until he expired. I mean, that's a lynching, right? This kind of stuff happens because people like Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump are pressing people's buttons all the time, right, almost making people feel like it's down to them to take matters into their own hands, blaming people of color, blaming immigrants, blaming Mexicans, blaming trans people, anybody who is not white and Christian and cisgender. I mean, this is very dangerous for American society.
It's very dangerous. And what they have done is convinced their audience that, we're in a state of nature, that it's the war of all against all, and that there is no authority who can save them, that they better arm up, that they better be prepared to defend themselves and their property and their people, because they are out to get them. They being, a whole panoply, like you said, a whole group of people. And you can't hear that message. You're already PTSD, right? You're already stressed out. So it's very easy to activate the fight-flight response. And these people are prepared to fight, right?
They almost want to, right?
They want to fight.
It's especially vets, ex-military people, and there's a lot of those who voted for Donald Trump. There is this sense that they are almost a militia, a kind of unofficial army. And this past week, there were Enrique Tarrio, of course, the leader of the Proud Boys, got his sentence for conspiracy charges against the United States, and 4 of them went down. I mean, the proof now is there of how serious they were taking this. They actually wanted a revolution. They wanted to bring down the Biden government and reinstall, or certainly maintain, the Trump government. I mean, that was the plan all along. I mean, the stakes are pretty high here, aren't they? The
stakes are very high. I don't know how anyone could look at what happened on January 6th. Of course, we know more now than we did on that moment in that day. But I don't know how anyone could look at what happened on January 6th, the way that the January 6th committee has told us about the multiple layers of plotting that went on at the state level with, groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. We have now seen several seditious conspiracy convictions. These are people who saw themselves as Trump's army, and they wanted to prevent the peaceful transition of power. And they were willing to use violence in order to do that.
And they heard from dozens of witnesses, over more than 3 months. This is one of the most serious cases that the Justice Department have taken forward. And, they were entirely successful. All of their hunches were right. All of the evidence was corroborated. And that story was not reported on Fox, was just not mentioned. And yet you could argue that was of the day. If it wasn't for Clarence Thomas being caught yet again taking bribes, it would have been the top story on every newspaper and every network. Proof that there was this seditious conspiracy in place to overturn the election. Right,
absolutely. And I mean, so Tucker Carlson had done for at least a year and a half, he had done a very specific plot of poisoning the well about whatever we would learn about the January 6th insurrection, coup, seditious conspiracy. He called them patriots. He called it a patriot purge. He said that there was this conspiracy in the federal government to rid the nation of these patriots, right? And so he had prepared his audience to believe that anyone who questioned what happened on January 6th was part of the problem, right? That they were not Americans. They were not patriots. And again, that kind of us versus them framing, that kind of conspiracy theory, cherry picking of evidence, all of that, of course, it does a disservice to his audience because they're not well informed, but they think that they are. And one of the most amazing things that I saw him do was during one of the January 6th hearings, he had a split screen with himself and the January 6th committee presentation. And then he would bring in some person to comment on what was going on. And he would do it strategically so that whenever the January 6th committee was showing video that he didn't want to show his audience or making points that he didn't want his audience to hear, he would bring in this guest and they would silence the committee. And so if you were watching this as an audience member, you would think that you had seen the actual January 6th committee presentation. You would think that you had all the information that was provided. But you didn't. You had a very carefully, very well orchestrated, very, edited version of reality. And that's the kind of thing that he was so good at doing, is making his audience feel informed, and yet they were completely deluded.
A bit like when Kevin McCarthy gave him the unedited tapes of the Capitol attack, and there was this whole furore created about, finally the real videos are going to be shown. And of course, his selections bared no resemblance to what was shown at the January 6th committee. It was the bits like where they walk through that main atrium. Right. I forget the name
just
of that
tourists.
beautiful room.
In the
just
rotunda.
being tourists, right?
Right.
And it's so obvious to anybody who has a modicum of critical thinking, right? And isn't this something that we really need to talk more about the people that have the ability to think critically and, you could call critical thinking like a bullshit radar. There's a kind of simpler version of it, right? Why weren't people's bullshit radars going off and being like, well, hang on a second. I mean, is it that people are so just unable, they're so committed to the cult that they're unable to see through that? They don't allow themselves to see through that? Or, I don't want to say people are dumb, because I don't think people are. I think, people in the main have a great instinct and an ability to kind of sense something. But that skill, that sense is eradicated when people like Tucker Carlson get on screen and deliver their own narrative.
That's right. So part of it is motivated reasoning, right? So that they don't want to be disabused of their false notions. So that's part of it, but we all have that. I think a really important part is the fact that they saw it with their own eyes. They wouldn't know the difference, right? So even if they think of themselves as critical thinkers, as using, bullshit detector, whatever, they're watching Tucker Carlson and they don't realize, that they're not seeing all that there is to see because they think they're seeing it with their own eyes. So therefore it's true. I mean, it's the same, worry that we have about deep fakes, right? Like I saw it, it happened, Donald Trump got arrested with all of these cops chasing him, whatever. And how do you can't unsee, what you saw. And I think that is one of the main ways that Tucker was able to manipulate his audience. He used really dramatic music. He used, these surprising cuts, they scroll, like it's very engaging. There's so much to see that your brain can't process all of it at the same time. You certainly can't think critically about all of it, right? Our brains just can't do that. And so, there's so much going on. You think you don't know.
The network has struggled to replace him in the last few weeks. The ratings dropped by half when someone else sat in that chair. There's and then Tucker Carlson did actually come out and a few days later and put a video out on social media. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you saw that video. I'm sure you did, but it made no sense. I mean, it was a whole word salad talking about how they're trying to do this to you and there's this and the media wants to do this and is stopping people from having this. And I watched it like 3 or 4 times and I was like, this is garbage. Like he said nothing. And it made me think, I thought he's trying to disassociate himself from all of the bad that he has done over the last few years by claiming that it's pointless. This type of media reporting is of no value. And I was like, wow, he's distancing himself from his own channel, his own product, because maybe that will help him in a future court case or something. Who knows? But then I was like, no, he just wants to confuse people. This goes back to the Steve Bannon thing, create chaos. Hit people with all these words and all these different views and all this different news, and they'll just be completely disoriented. What do you think he was trying to do in that?
Yeah, when I watched that, I thought, again, because he has this connection with his audience, right? He has more credibility with his audience than Fox News does. And I saw him trying to keep the credibility that he has with his audience and to turn the us versus them polarization against Fox, right?
Right.
And it's what we saw happen when Donald Trump attacked Fox News after the first primary of the 2016 election. If you remember, Megyn Kelly asked him questions that he didn't like. And so he went on this rampage and attacked her and Fox News all night long. And then for weeks, they were at war. And I think that what I saw there was Tucker Carlson sort of trying to lay out that pathway for himself, that he can move forward, and try to retain whatever integrity and credibility he had with his audience outside of Fox by attacking them.
Yeah. I have a feeling he's going to set up his own little streaming channel or something. I don't think he'll go to Newsmax or somewhere.
He wants to host a debate now.
That's right. He wants to have like a GOP primary debate of his own.
Yeah. And if he has Trump on his side, which it seems like he does, we'll see, because Trump's for Trump. I think that is an important axis of, conservative information. And, the two of them working together, I think they'll be quite powerful with Republican and conservative voters.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk in just a moment about this concept of owning the libs, and we'll explain what that really means. First, we have to take a quick pause for our sponsor, and then we'll come back with more from Dr. Jennifer Mercieca. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's so easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. I know in my own life I'm dealing with a lot of different factors, be it family, friends, or work. When we spend all our time giving, it can leave us feeling stretched thin and burned out. Therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life, so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. You see, therapy, it's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries and generally speaking about how to become the best version of yourself. And by the way, therapy isn't just for those who've experienced a major trauma. It's for everyone, because what you're going through matters. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/weekendshow today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/weekendshow. Everyone knows how annoying cheap razors are. The cuts, the irritation, the frustration. And don't get me started with subscription razor services. The headaches those can cause. That's why you've got to meet Henson Shaving. Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer that has made parts for the International Space Station and Mars rover. And now they're bringing precision engineering to your shaving experience. Razor blades are like diving boards. The longer the board, the more the wobble. The more wobble, the more nicks, cuts, and scrapes. A bad shave isn't a blade problem, it's an extension problem. By using aerospace-grade CNC machines, Henson makes metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. That means a secure and stable blade with a vibration-free shave. And it gets better. The razor has built-in channels to evacuate hair and cream, which makes clogging virtually impossible. Seriously, Henson Shaving wants to be the best razor, not the best razor business. That means no plastic, no subscriptions, no proprietary blades, and no planned obsolescence. The Henson razor works with standard dual-edged blades to give you that old-school shave with the benefits of new-school tech. Once you own a Henson razor, it's only about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. My first shave with the Henson razor was incredibly refreshing. The design is sleek, the durability is top-notch. The Henson razor is truly so much better than your run-of-the-mill, quote-unquote, traditional razor brand. And the affordability factor is absolutely game-changing. No more wasting your money on expensive blades. With Henson Shaving, you can get a year of blades for $5. It's time to say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that'll last you a lifetime. Visit hensonshaving.com/weekend to pick the razor for you and use code WEEKEND and you'll get 2 years worth of blades free with your razor. Just make sure you add them to your cart. That's 100 free blades when you head to hensonshaving.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND. Green Chef has expanded their menu. Now choose from 30 recipes weekly with the option to mix and match meals from very different dietary preferences in the same box without changing your plan. This means you can order vegan one day and then keto the next. Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well with dinners that work for you, not the other way round. Bring more flavor to your table this spring with Green Chef's wholesome, elevated recipes featuring seasonal, organic produce and unique farm-fresh ingredients. Also, Green Chef is the only meal kit that is both carbon and plastic offset. Green Chef offsets 100% of their carbon footprint as well as 100% of the plastic in every box. I absolutely love Green Chef because of how easy it is to cook the meals and how delicious each meal is. Our favorite recipe is the Parmesan crusted chicken. It's incredible. Go to greenchef.com/weekendshow60 and use code weekendshow60 to get 60% off plus free shipping. That's greenchef.com/weekendshow60 and use code weekendshow60 to get 60% off plus free shipping. Owning the libs seems to be the kind of modus operandi of the Republican Party these days, at whatever cost. And we have this kind of debt limit, debt ceiling theatrical game coming up now, where it's a to and fro between the White House and Biden and Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans. And it's going to be like a standoff, and it has the potential to crash the economy if the US defaults on its debt. And just for context, this idea of the debt limit was created by Congress in 1917, and it sets the maximum amount of outstanding federal debt that the US government can incur. Well, I think in January this year, the total national debt and the debt ceiling both stood at $31.4 trillion. What does it say about patriotism when the Republicans are prepared to crash the economy just to own the libs?
Yeah, it's not an issue of patriotism for them. Yeah, definitely owning the libs or, frustrating Biden's agenda probably is how they would say it. Is the only thing that matters. I mean, it's the same thing they said, when Obama was elected, right? Like, our one goal is to make sure that Obama doesn't get to pass any policies. Biden has done a fairly good job with at least some aspects of the economy. And that's not a story that we're told very often. And so this provides this sort of vacuum where, the Republicans can get involved with this thing. And most people don't understand the debt ceiling. So, it's a story that is rife for confusion.
And
we're already
exploitation
confused.
Because people can't get their heads around it. Yeah.
That's right. We're like, wait, why do we have that debt? That sounds like a lot of money. If I had that much debt, that would be bad. And they think that it's, about future spending. And so that's why those issues are linked together in the way that McCarthy is trying to negotiate this thing. But they're not linked together. And
because it's Trump's debt, really. I mean, it's the debt that's gone before.
Yes.
And the whole point of this is that the US is a very wealthy country. It spends an enormous amount of money on the military and Social Security. It has no shortage of tax dollars coming in. And it can afford this. It can afford this level of debt kind of on a day-to-day level. But for me as an outsider, seeing this kind of wrangling that happens every year or two where they kind of use it as political collateral. And the reason I refer to patriotism is because if you're putting the country first, you don't default on the debt just to win points against the other side.
Right. I don't think that that people understand, sort of how much the United States benefits from being, the world's currency, from being the stable economy, from being the one that most of the world anyway looks to for financial leadership. China would love to have that role. There are other countries that would love to have that role. And the minute we start defaulting on our debt, the minute we lose that power, right? And so to me, it's a national security issue. So when you talk about patriotism, that's how I think of it. And I don't know that we're hearing that story presented that way. And I think that it's, a part of America's soft power, but it's also part of our hard power, right? And so, yeah, I don't see how the Republicans can think of themselves as advocating American first policies while ruining America's credit.
Let's just talk about the psychology of owning the libs, because it has become something not just for the Republican leaders, but also for Republican voters, where they care not for the detail of policy. It's just about getting one over on the libs, exposing the libs, anything that makes the kind of liberal left is a loss for them and a win for Republicans and especially MAGA Republicans. And this is something that the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene are kind of pushing anything. Literally, they'll take anything before a committee. They'll come up with there's a story they're trying to peddle at the moment about I don't know, Biden story being paid off by something and Hunter and everything. I mean, none of it is based in truth. It's just owning the libs. What does that mean really for the electorate?
Yeah, it's very interesting to me to think about just how many people pay attention to politics and how many people avoid politics altogether. Something like 87% of the nation does not pay attention to politics and political information at all on a day-to-day basis. It's actually a very small percentage of the electorate. And that's, true for as long as political communication scholars have been looking at that, right? So the earliest studies that were done in the 1940s, they went door to door, every 7 houses, and they asked, how much are you paying attention to politics? And people were like, yeah, I'm not. I don't know anything about that. So
but even after Trump, is there not more engagement post the Trump presidency?
There was engagement during the Trump administration, but it has fallen off again. And so you see a lot of news organizations are having trouble, struggling. And so that means that the people who do pay attention, like us, we tend to be a little bit different from the normal electorate. We're more engaged. We're more likely to pay for news subscriptions. We feel uncomfortable if we have missed a news story, so we want to check on the information. We're willing to argue with people on the internet about political topics. Most people avoid that, at all costs. And so it's not hard to see how the people who are politically engaged are extremists for their party, right? Highly polarized, highly engaged. And so, they want to own the libs. My dad watches Fox News and OAN and Newsmax and, is not a Biden supporter. And I was with him in the grocery store and I said, let's go over and get some bread. And he said, let's go, Brandon. Ha ha ha. Right. And he started chuckling and I was like, Daddy, and it was just rote, right? The slogan, like, let's own the libs over there in the bread department. It's call and response. It's part of their identity, like who they are as they walk around. It's certainly not good for the nation. It's not good.
But it also lacks any detail, doesn't it? Because when they are asked, what don't you like about critical race theory?
Right.
They have absolutely no explanation or understanding of what it might entail. Right. And this is all, about top line. It's about selling politics. This is why Trump was so successful during his term, right? Because he was able to sell these, very kind of extremist, but also quite kind of obvious policies and make it clear to people in a much more digestible fashion what his policies were. Whereas the rest of us looked at them and we were like, what, you're going to ban all Muslims from coming into America? Right.
He didn't even tell us policies. He just told us who to hate. He just told us what topics, to be afraid of. Yeah. And it's, of course, that polarization. But at the same time, it's the way that the political spectacle, right, constructs characters. There are good guys. There are bad guys. There are plot lines that need to be advanced. People need to be entertained, right? You have just a small audience of Americans who are willing to watch the news. You got to give them something entertaining to keep them there. And so, people are engaged and enraged. And that's the media formula for today. That's the best way to have a reliable audience. That's why Tucker Carlson got 3 million viewers every night. He kept them engaged and enraged.
This idea of this slogan of Make America Great Again, I've been thinking more about this recently. Obviously, it's going to become another, popular, I don't know, it's going to add another again to the end of it, again. Because a lot of these people, when they're asked, when was America great, they reference this period before wokeness and before minority groups were even given any attention at all, where they could be racist and nobody criticized them, everybody laughed about it. So they're kind of choosing a period between, I guess, the late 50s and maybe the the early 80s. I don't know. Maybe they've picked a period when they were in their prime and earning good money and being as racist as they liked. And I don't want to tar all Republicans with the racist brush. That's not my intention. But I think that the individuals that I'm thinking about who I've seen interviewed, they do want to hark back to that period. No one mentions 2016 through 2020 as a period that was great, which happened to be Donald Trump's premiership. They always want to go back to this 1950s, 60s, 70s period. They seem to forget that there was actually 4 years where supposedly it was good.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, nostalgia, right, is a powerful force. And it's a Greek word, and it means a sickness, like a homesickness, those two words put together. And so these are people who are nostalgic for a time and a place that doesn't exist anymore, that will not exist in the future, and cannot exist. And they look back at probably their childhood, right? Which everyone looks back at their childhood as an innocent time and as a better time. They didn't know the problems of the world. And they look at that with a nostalgic eye and they say, I want that back. Who will give that to me? When during the 2016 campaign, when Trump would say, make America great again, he never specified what he meant by that exactly. And I could only find one example of him actually answering the question, when was America great before? And for him, Maggie Haberman asked him this, and he said it was during the late 1800s, during, the Industrial Revolution. And there were no restraints on business. There were no regulations. There were no rules, right? And you could have, fat cats in big money bags,
Yeah. There was also no human rights or
rule the world. Exactly.
Or protections for workers or any of those things.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when Trump talks about making his Trump towns or whatever he's talking about, right, where he wants, this is his big thing that he wants
freedom
to do.
Cities.
Freedom cities in 2024. He's going to build these freedom cities. He's talking about a place with authoritarian rule, right, that are business towns, right, company towns, where there are no rules and regulations. And,
he's describing China, though, isn't he? I mean, isn't that what he's doing? He's describing sweatshops in China.
Yeah. Where, he's got little fiefdoms.
It's scary, isn't it? Because
I don't think people really want that.
That's the, that there's all this heat placed on, communism is bad and socialism is bad. And actually, when Trump is describing his ideal, he's very much wanting to kind of replicate these periods in history.
That's what it sounds like to me.
But the word that underlies all of this is fascism, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
That really is the thing that people don't quite understand the historical references, and therefore they don't want to apply it to now, because they might think of a fascist leader as being genocidal, for example. But actually, you could argue that Trump is that guy.
Oh yeah, I would absolutely make that argument. Fascism is about nostalgia. It's about longing for some previous era that is imagined to be more idyllic than the one that we live in. It's refusing to embrace modernity. It's anti-science. It's misogynistic. It's looking for that strong leader. So when I said that Tucker Carlson and Trump and all of these right-wing media figures had created this impression that, we're in the war of all against all, right? The solution to that in Hobbes is the Leviathan, right? It's the strong leader. And so, creating this fear, that the future does not include us, right? That it doesn't have any of those good, happy things that were in our memory, that we are in this chaotic moment of all against all warfare. I better arm up and I better give all of my power and loyalty to the strong leader who will protect me. I mean, that's fascism.
Trump has been making these very weird videos. I'm sure you've been enjoying them enormously, where he talks in the shadows with a couple of American flags behind him. He's kind of dimly lit like some weird, like Stalinist character. It's very interesting, isn't it? And he was talking the other day about how he would rid the country of homelessness, and then went on to describe how he would arrest everybody and take them to designated camps. And I was like, really? Like, he was describing like Japanese internment camps. And I was completely stunned. Is it that we've had such a period, since the war, which ended in 1945, we have had this kind of peacetime period now where people have actually forgotten about the atrocities, and therefore they're open to kind of new ideas, which might actually not be new at all.
Yeah, I think that's right. It used to not be controversial to say that Nazis are bad, right? That fascism is for losers and that America is, stands for democracy. Those used to be uncontroversial statements. This is what the greatest generation, lived through. Boomers grew up with this. But now all of a sudden in the last few years, we're like, oh, well, maybe Nazis aren't so bad. And maybe fascism is actually good. And right, like maybe the real Nazis are those liberals who believe in the rule of law and, education and things like that. It's a very confusing time where up is down and down is up. And we sort of have to get our bearings again.
Let's talk just for a moment about the wokeness, because this is something that Ron DeSantis, who's currently touring, sharing his brand of Florida extremism with the rest of the country, is trying to, push. In fact, there was a video, like a meme doing the rounds of him saying the word woke like 30 times in 20 seconds or something. Mm-hmm. I mean, to be awake is something that I am personally very proud of, and I'm sure you feel the same.
Yeah.
And I like to refer to it as being awake rather than woke. Mm. Being awake to the needs of minority groups or to people who have traditionally struggled in a dominant kind of white male society. It's not complicated, is it, to understand the idea of a modern society being more thoughtful about everybody in society and not just those who have traditionally succeeded or been the masters of their universe. But it's now being used as a political tool in such a way that whereas black people suffered during that kind of leading up to the civil rights movement, and now it's trans people, it's trans athletes, it's LGBTQ community, the kind of the latest victims of this weaponization. How do you feel, and what do you think about this idea that wokeness is now used for all the wrong reasons?
Yeah, so it's very similar to what we saw in 2016. Donald Trump ran against political correctness, right? So his whole argument was they hate me because I speak the truth and no one's going to tell you this because they're so politically correct and, scripted and poll tested and all that. And so it's a continuation of that. It's a very popular idea to be against political correctness. I didn't know how unpopular political correctness was until I did some research on that, and they have polled that, of course. And it turns out a lot of people are really frustrated about political correctness and about wokeness.
Well, Bill Maher, for example, on his own show.
He had a whole show.
Elon Musk on, and they were both celebrating each other as two white men, celebrating the fact that, wokeness is the worst part of American culture right now.
Yeah. So whenever they talk about political correctness or wokeness, I hear it as the same critique. And it's essentially, as I hear it, we don't want to treat people as human beings, right? We don't want to affirm human dignity. We don't want anything. We don't want to hear about it. We don't want to do it, certainly. We don't want anything that isn't easy for us, right? That doesn't cater to us and our needs. And I just don't think that's successful, right? Like the world is changing. The world has changed. And
well, the rest of the world has. I mean,
right.
That's something to remember, isn't it? That
Right.
outside of the US, the rest of the world has completely moved on.
Right.
They're dealing with climate change. They're dealing. Wokeness is not even really an issue for so many countries. It's just society normal.
Yeah. So it might have been shocking for Americans to see an African American president. But when you saw Barack Obama on the world stage with other world leaders, he fit right in, right? Like it's an international world that we live in. And demographics are not on the side of, white male exclusionary power anymore. That's just not going to happen in the future. And so, I almost feel bad for them when they complain about like the woke situation. Because it just tells me it's a tell, right? Like in poker, that they're scared about the future because they don't think they can control it. But the other part of it that you asked about, I think is really important, which is the positioning of people as hate objects, right, through this discourse. And, politics, especially over the last 20 years around the world, is about creating an enemy and running against that enemy. And so the Republican Party today has decided that the number one enemy, the biggest threat upon which they can rally their constituents is anti-trans discourse. We've heard we should eliminate trans people from public life. We should eliminate trans people from sports. We should.
And even from politics, as we saw with Zoe Zephyr
from political spaces altogether. Yeah. And it's really, really important that we pay attention to that. I think that transgender people are an interesting thing to think about in terms of fascism, because fascism is all about normalizing a certain understanding of the world, right? So we're going to make you think that we know what normal is and that everything else that's not normal is bad and evil and out to get you. We're going to tell you that normal is, white, hetero, whatever.
Christian and
Christian, whatever.
Republican.
Certainly Republican. And it has a gun. And trans people don't fit any of those, they don't fit those boxes. And in fact, their very existence gives the lie, proves that normalization is a lie, right? That normal is a fiction that's been constructed. And so to me, the reason why trans people are being targeted is because they think, of course, that it's politically expedient, that it will rally their base, but also because the existence of trans people directly confounds the fascist agenda, just their existence. And so they want to eradicate them from public space. They want to make it impossible for people to transition. They want to criminalize treating children, with gender affirming care. They want to do all of these things just to create the hate object, but also because they want to show their ability to define normal. And I think that's so important to understand.
Isn't it going to become a serious problem?
It's
when
already
the United States is exposed as being 50 years behind the rest of the world, right? Yeah. Not just in terms of society and culture and integration, but in terms of climate change, which has been politicized here, and AI, which is being used, already being used on such a level elsewhere. I know a lot of its origins are here, and but Silicon Valley is not the rest of America. And so just in terms of labor and training, America will be left behind if people are not totally on top of all these things. And my concern is that, this country is so isolationist by nature of its scale that it hasn't really taken the time to see how other countries are doing it and dealing with it and living with it. And that means that the U.S. will suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. So cultural theorist named Raymond Williams wrote about dominant, emergent, and residual cultures and how they sort of battle for control. How, what was once a dominant culture becomes residual over time, right? Because some new culture emerges that defines reality and what's important in different ways. And I think what you see at this moment in the United States is that, there was a sort of new emergent culture that became dominant, and the residual culture has decided to fight back, right? That they will not accept the new normal. And the rest of the world has already moved on, like you said. And so we are at this point, this residual culture. Residual cultures die out, and so again, if we're thinking about, national security, American soft power, how we are in terms of other countries and how we are on the world stage, being a residual culture, it's like, an ancient empire that fell apart, right? It just, you take yourself out of the position of power.
Especially if there's infighting, which is what the Russians want us to do and what the Chinese want us to do. They've been helping that along with their interference, not just in elections, but in our access to social media and then public discourse. I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it, how there's a whole other world, beneath the surface, behind our computer screens, or if you walk around or take public transport or public transit, you see people, everyone's like this, right? Everyone's like staring into their device. And I look at those people and I'm like, you think you're looking at your phone, but your phone is looking at you. Yeah. And you have been brainwashed into doing this so that whoever is in there is manipulating you through Facebook or TikTok or however it is that you're enjoying that thing. We are so, this kind of dopamine effect that you spoke about, we're so drawn to it, but actually we're being manipulated. Our data is being used and mined and harvested, and we have become, that Fritz Lang film from 1939, Metropolis, right, which is definitely worth rewatching. It's a little long and dull, but it has that kind of 1984 message, and we are all becoming the robots. And we don't even realize.
That's right. There's Tristan Harris, who's a design ethicist, computer ethicist. He did an interview that I watch with my students where he says that there are 1,000 engineers that spend every day trying to make sure that you spend as much of your time on your apps and your phones as you possible. And they do that in such a way that their goals become your goals. And we repeat that a lot over the course of the semester, when I teach propaganda, because there are so many layers of things in our life where our goals are pushed down. You might think that you go on your phone for a specific reason, but as soon as you get on your phone, whatever that reason was is eliminated. And, that there are all of these apps that you wake up every morning and you're like, I'm going to have a day. And all these apps are like, I'm going to control your day. It's amazing.
It's so interesting. I just finally want to talk about CNN. As you know, they've traditionally leaned left. Well, the new CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, which is CNN's parent company, on Friday morning defended the cable network's upcoming town hall event with Donald Trump by invoking the age-old gotta hear both sides logic. His name's David Zaslav. He was asked to weigh in on the twice impeached former president's scheduled 10th of May appearance on CNN. He said the US has a divided government. We need to hear both voices. And as I mentioned earlier, Caitlin Collins is going to be the anchor for that episode. I mean, I am aghast that a twice impeached former president who committed treason and an insurrection against his own country, who mishandled the COVID pandemic, who lied every day, where there was a scandal every day, who's currently in court for a rape charge, and 26 different women have allegations of sexual assault against him. How is it that one of the leading news networks is prepared to give him a platform, and how dangerous is that?
Yeah, to me, it just shows how disordered our news values are, right? So one way of thinking about news values, what we should be paying attention to and covering in journalism, is that we should follow a democratic motive. This would be my preference, right? Which says that we should be motivated by what would be the best for democracy, democratic stability. So things like I said before, like reducing polarization, building trust between communities, trying to alleviate frustration, things like that, solve political problems. That would be a democratic motive. But then there's the profit motive, there's the partisanship motive, there's all kinds of the spectacle motive, other motives that can drive a news agenda. And it does seem like inviting Trump isn't going to help the cause of democracy. It is, about the partisan agenda, right? So there's an election coming up. He's the front runner. That means that he has news value. And that's
his box office. Same old story.
And he's going to draw
nothing.
attention, and it'll be a news event. Maybe Caitlin Collins is going to ask tough questions, which would be dramatic and exciting, right? So the spectacle aspect of it, there's all kinds of things that go into thinking about that. But I don't think that democracy and what's good for democracy is at the forefront of that thinking.
Because I'm sure you can too, I can predict the type of questions that Caitlin Collins is preparing. Mm-hmm. It's so obvious to me. And she's going to try and, she's going to give him a shit sandwich, basically, right? She's going to butter him up to make him spill the beans, and then she's going to try and hit him harder towards the end, and he's going to get very frustrated, and it's going to end up being a bit of a slagging match. But none of it should be happening. I mean, none of it, because it's almost as if profit, yet again, is more important than the health of the country. And this is very similar to the Republicans wanting to crash the economy, to own the libs. It's about, this idea of self being more important than this collective responsibility.
Yeah. And I'm not sure who the audience for this is going to be, because Republicans don't want to watch CNN even to see Trump. And liberals don't want to see Trump on CNN. And so maybe there are undecided moderate voters who don't know anything about Donald Trump, but I can't imagine that there's many of them who exist. And so I'm not sure who the audience will be for this. Donald Trump will attack her. He will lie continuously. We can predict exactly what he'll say.
He'll double down on the same old script.
There's no news value. I really don't see what they think is going to be good about this. Okay.
We shall see. We have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you for joining us yet again, Dr. Jennifer Mercieca.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Anthony Davis. Do subscribe to The Weekend Show here on YouTube or as an audio podcast, and support me on Patreon at patreon.com/5Minute News. 5 Minute News is a short daily podcast which drops every morning, so you can hear me tell you what's happening in the US and around the world while you make your morning coffee. Join me next week with a brand new special guest and 3 more factual news stories to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.